Previously on the American Justice Podcast.
Some of the evidence that I looked at was actually created by law enforcement. It looks like they received something from a mobile network operator legal compliance department, and then they created their own spreadsheets or whatever from that information. So we really don't know what they may have modified, whether they tailored the evidence to fit the crime or whether they just simply were blundering along. But in any event, it would be very normal for that type of evidence to be precluded from admission in a case. Any other type of evidence would be precluded if it were tainted such as that.
There is an epidemic in America's criminal justice system: the prosecution and conviction of innocent people for crimes they did not commit. Welcome to American Justice. The American Justice Podcast Army works to free men and women wronged by the criminal justice system. It's not only about the innocent who have been imprisoned, but also the victims of the crimes as well. No one deserves justice more than them. And now, here's your host, Scott Pogensey.
Hello, AJ Army. Welcome back to your podcast. I'm excited to bring you the final part of our coverage on the state of Texas versus Brandon Dale Woodruff. As I mentioned in previous episodes, this episode is going to be about 95% just the voiceover recordings that I produced of the closing arguments. I did this because I want you to hear directly from the special prosecutors for the Attorney General's office exactly what their theory of the case was. I'm sure that there are a lot of skeptical people out there that are thinking to themselves, man, Scott just isn't telling us something. The state had to have something else in order for the jury to find Brandon guilty. There must be something. Well, I thought that the whole time that I was looking through all of the evidence. Many times I would get to a document or an interview or a piece of evidence and think to myself, okay, finally, this has to be the thing that convinced the jury. Unfortunately, I never came across that. Not one time in everything that I reviewed made me think, man, this guy's guilty. In fact, that is the only reason that I even took an interest in this case in the first place. There never is that thing that I call the gotcha moment. There's never a moment where you just sit back and say, okay. There it is. That proves it right there. Not one. And as you're about to hear from the prosecution, they don't have any either. Okay, at this point in the trial, the state and the defense have both rested, and it's time to hear, word for word, directly from the trial transcript itself, what these two sides said to the jury. First up is Miss Adrienne McFarland. Her and Ralph Guerrero were the two prosecutors that were prosecuting the case for the Attorney General. And then we'll hear from Katherine Ferguson, Brandon's trial attorney. And then, at the end, we'll hear from Ralph Guerrero. The state gets to go twice at the beginning and the end because theoretically, they have the burden of proof. They have to prove to you, the jury, that Brandon was the one that killed his parents beyond a reasonable doubt. So that's the reason that they get to go first and last. As I said last week, I want you to count on your hand how many times the prosecution even references Brandon being at the house when his parents were murdered. Then I want you to count how many times they try to tell the jury that Brandon's gay, he's an exaggerator, he's a liar, etc., etc. Just a little hint. You'll need more fingers on the ladder. Okay, here we go. Enjoy.
Then attached is the jury verdict sheet, giving you the options of finding the defendant guilty of capital murder or not guilty. We will now proceed to our closing arguments. As with the rest of the case, the state goes first, and the state may begin.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I know it has been a long 3 weeks, and we really do appreciate how much attention you paid throughout the trial. I'm going to start off the argument, and then I believe Ms. Ferguson will have a chance to talk to you, and then Mr. Guerrero is going to conclude. And the reason the state is allowed to both open and close the argument is because we have the burden of proof, and we carry that all the way through the trial. Now, we believe the evidence in this case is simply overwhelming that Brandon Woodruff did kill both of his parents on October 16, 2005. I'm going to go over some of the specific facts of the case and just talk about his life at the time and what was going on with him. In the charge, if you recall, it talked about how you can consider the relationship of the parties at the time. And we think that's key to this case, because you have to understand everything that was going on in his life that led him to take the awful decision that he made to take his parents' lives. We don't know exactly why, but I think we have a pretty good idea at this point of why he did what he did. One of the things that's become clear, I think, through evidence, is that Brandon was living in a complete fantasy world. He was representing himself to be someone that he simply was not. He was claiming that he was a model, that he was flying to or had plans to fly to New York. He actually did fly to Florida. I don't think for modeling. He was representing to his friends that his family was wealthy, that he was wealthy. He liked to buy stuff for people. He was simply living in a fantasy that wasn't true. He constantly talked about this truck, both to his friends at ACU and his friends in Dallas. He was obsessed with that truck. I mean, it's not like he just mentioned this truck to one person. You heard from witness after witness how he talked about that truck and how he was going to be getting that truck. Just was a complete fantasy world that he was living in. He said that he had gotten that truck for his birthday and that he had gotten a stock trailer for his birthday. You heard that from numerous witnesses talking about that truck. And there's also an email about that truck, if you recall, that he's talking to one of his friends at ACU about how I have to go home and get this truck that I got for my birthday. Those were his own words, not words of a witness, but his own words. You know he was lying, and he was in a fantasy. The reality, though, wasn't even close to the fantasy. He talked about modeling and how he was getting Armani clothes for that modeling. If you look at those credit card receipts, receipt after receipt, Armani exchange, Armani exchange. He was buying clothes with his credit card that he ran up. He talks about modeling. You heard from several witnesses that when they saw the pictures, they thought they were just snapshots. They didn't think it was any kind of professional modeling. He talked about how he told Michelle Lee how his aunts in Texarkana were going to help him get into the modeling business. We hear from his aunt. It turns out it was just a trip down to the mall. He keeps talking about how he's going to be living in a bigger house, and his parents are building this bigger house with his friends at ACU, representing that to his friends in Dallas as well. It's not true. They were moving to a double wide, and there's nothing wrong with that. But y'all heard on the Channel 11 video that he despised that trailer, and he was not going to move back there. He represented that he had plenty of cash and his family had plenty of cash. The reality was not there. His family was struggling. His dad needed that refund check, and he just continued to spend and spend and spend until he had nothing left. Turning your attention to the weekend of the 15th and the 16th of October, his two worlds were colliding. He had been living these two separate lives. The one life where he's in 4-H and he's Morgan's boyfriend and he's an ACU student, and the other life where he's out partying with his friends in Dallas. He has a boyfriend. They know nothing about his other life. And that weekend is so important as it's leading up to what happened on Sunday night. Because you look at what he did from the time he got in town on Friday night when he's dropped off. When he drops off Robert Martinez at Jansen Herring's apartment, what does he say? Well, I'm in a hurry. I've got a party to go to. So he goes to a party in Dallas, probably. By early the next morning, he's at Morgan's house. Okay, switch back over to the other life. Goes with her that day, brings her Sonic in the morning, and brings her gifts. They go get the lamb. Go out that night. And then what does he do? As soon as he drops her off, he's heading back to Dallas. You saw the toll records. He's partying with his friends in Dallas again Saturday night after he drops his girlfriend off. Next morning, switches back over to the other life. Now he's with his family and he's helping them out and he's doing stuff. And he's with Morgan some that day at the Ag Barn. And then finally, what happens? He goes back to Dallas again. Partying in Dallas again. But the thing that's interesting about this is that on the 16th, he allowed these worlds to collide because he didn't care anymore. He knew that his life as an ACU student was over. He wanted to tell his parents he was gay that weekend. This was all part of the plan. He wanted to confront them and tell them, and he goes to S4 with a friend from college, Robert Martinez. His Dallas friends said we've never met anybody before from his other world, from high school, or from ACU. He doesn't care anymore at that point because he knows that life is over. He's cashing in. He's killed his parents and he's starting a new life. He's going to get those insurance proceeds and he's moving on. So he doesn't care what his friends at ACU think anymore. It's okay for those worlds to come together. Just to go over some of the lies that he told, and there's so many that I'm going to touch on a few because it's simply impossible to go over all of them. But the truck is a huge part of this case, and his desire to get that truck and his parents' unwillingness to give him the truck. And he lies over and over again about the truck. He even lies in his own statement about the truck as far as when he actually picked it up that weekend. He got it when he first got in town, or if he got it later, he's inconsistent in his own statements about the truck. He even told one of his own witnesses that they called that he was taking it to school and that he was real proud of the truck. His whole excuse for having the truck to his family after his parents were found murdered was it wasn't working. That's a lie. We know it was working. The FBI checked it out, and you heard from his aunt, Linda Matthews. She drove it back and forth from here to Texarkana with no problems. That's a lie. He also told his Aunt Linda that he got that truck a while back. When she first confronted him about it in the days after his parents' murders, she said, "What were you doing with your mom's truck?" "Oh, I got it a while back." Of course, then he switches his story later on to, "Oh, I got it that weekend," but just continuing to lie about that truck. Some of the other lies revolved around his wealth and the impression of wealth that he was giving everybody. And again, this isn't from just one or two witnesses that we brought you. It's from witness after witness. And this all ties into his psyche and the fantasy world he was living in, and how, when it came down to it that weekend of the 15th and 16th, it was crashing in on him. The weekend of the 16th, he told numerous lies after the fact about what he did that day. He says he picked up Robert Martinez to some of his family members and went straight back to ACU. Remember? I know it's been a while since they testified, but that's what he told early on. And then he switched it to, "Oh, well, we spent the night at Robert Martinez's dad's house." No, that's not true. So it was just lie after lie. I think one of the biggest lies he told was in the Channel 11 interview. At the beginning, when the reporter is talking to him, he says, I never said I left between 6 and 7. Well, you heard his own words on his video statement. He clearly says, Dad went and got pizza around 6:15. I ate, and we left right after that. If that's not between 6 and 7, I don't know what is. Some of his final lies that he told were in his interview on the Channel 11 tape. And this is after the fact, and he's trying to point the finger at anybody but himself. He talks about the barn guy, how he was supposed to be showing up that evening to pick up a check. Well, you heard from Russell Looney, and you know that's a lie. He had gotten paid the week before, and the check on the bottom says payment in full. He wasn't expecting to come out there that day. He had already been paid. He was waiting to hear from Dennis about maybe future work, but as far as that weekend, there are no calls between Dennis and Russell Looney. It's a lie. And he was just trying to, this poor man, who had just done some work for them, he tried to point the finger at him. Oh, maybe he could have been the one who did it. Talks about the bad neighborhood and how they had to lock the doors. You heard from witness after witness about what Dennis and Norma thought of that house. They were happy to be moving out there. They weren't concerned about their safety. And the first time you hear about this from him is after the fact. Before it's just, I don't like the double wide. But after the fact, it's, oh, there's gang activity or there's bad things going on in that neighborhood. And what do you find out from the police? You heard from Ranger Collins. He checked that neighborhood. There were 2 calls. One that was dealing with a cleanup man that the neighbor saw right after, and one from 6 years ago where some kids knocked down a mailbox. That's it for that neighborhood. It wasn't a bad neighborhood. That was all part of him trying to take the attention away from himself and point it to someone else. You heard from Tim Applewhite. He was one of his friends from ACU, and he talked about how when they had lunch that day in Texarkana before the funeral, how he was talking about that he had heard there were all of these graffiti signs and weird things in the house at the crime scene, and the bodies were posed weird. Again, he's trying to take the attention away from himself and point it to someone else. Claimed he had never operated a gun, that he didn't know how to shoot a gun. You've heard it. He told his family members that. That was a lie. And he also, at the end of that interview with the police, starts talking about these problems he's having with his high school friends and what's going on there, that they're spreading rumors about him. Well, it turns out those rumors are, in fact, true. And they're trying to protect Morgan Lee and tell her about, hey, this is what's really going on with this guy. He's leading a double life. Again, trying to take the attention away from himself and point it to anyone but himself. I want to talk just for a few minutes about his financial situation of what was going on at the time. The first credit card we showed you is a Citi card that he got that summer, and in a matter of a week he had maxed it out to $2,500. And part of the reason why this card is significant is because Linda Matthews told you, and Ranger Collins told you, that this was found when the family was cleaning up that Royse City house that weekend. They were only there that Sunday cleaning up the house, and it was found then in the house. And it has a stamp, and it's not canceled. Well, what happened here is he was going to mail it to his dad, but I feel strongly that, as the weekend of the 16th was approaching, Dennis and Norma said, you need to come home now. There are things that we have to talk about. And that credit card was just one of the things. The refund check was another one of the things that they wanted to talk to him about, I feel sure. You heard from Charla that she said she had talked to her dad, and her dad had found out about that refund check and was upset about it because he was counting on it to pay bills. From the records, we know that Dennis Woodruff made that call to ACU on the 7th. We know from the records that that check was posted to the account on the 30th of September, and it was for over $1,300. So somewhere in between that time, he cashed that check. And we heard from Eric Gentry. Eric said that he heard the conversation between he and his dad over the phone, and the dad was upset, and Brandon was saying, I've already spent all the money. It's already gone. I already spent it all. Dennis Woodruff had ordered him home that weekend. There were things that had to be talked about, and this is one of them. And if you look in the records, this refund check was not for the dropped classes. It was for overpayment of his tuition, and that's in the records as well. The next credit card that we brought you was his Capital One credit card, and he opened it in the middle of September, and in a matter of a weekend, basically, he maxes it out. And you look at those charges for that weekend, and he basically went to Dallas, went out to eat, went on a shopping spree, paid for a hotel room. In one weekend, maxed that out. He's living in a fantasy world, and he can't keep up with it. The thing that's interesting about this card is that he almost maxes it out to $963 that first weekend. But then he doesn't use it at all for 2 weeks. And that 2 weeks just happens to coincide with the time when he got that refund check. So he maxes out the credit card. Oh, and then he comes up with another scheme. Let me get this refund check, get the refund check, cash it, spend it in 2 weeks. He's out of money again. And then, on the weekend that he's there in Rockwall, that's all he's got left is that little bit of money that's on that card, on the Capital One card. And so these are the purchases that weekend on that Capital One card. And there's several things in here that I think are interesting. The first is that he buys gas in Plano, and he only puts $12 in. That's on the morning of the 15th. He's not going to fill up a truck that he's not going to be taking back. $12. Enough to get around maybe for a little while, but that's not going to get him back to ACU. And then we see these small purchases to Sonic. That's where he bought the breakfast for Morgan. In Hillsboro, he charged $1.72. Now, I know lots of people use their credit cards to charge small amounts, but if you were about to max your credit card out, are you going to use a charge for $1.72 if you have any cash at all on you? If you have any cash, are you going to do that? You're not. And then early the morning of the 16th, there's a call to customer service. He's trying to see how much credit he's got left. Where does he stand? And then, with the final charge, once he's got that Chevy truck and he's heading back to Abilene, he goes over his limit. He is completely tapped for resources at that point, except what's missing from his parents' house after the murders. Their wallets are gone. That's really the only thing that could ever be determined was missing. And when he's arrested, he's got his mom's Inwood bank card. And you look at those Inwood bank records, and it's clear that is a credit card account, or checking account, that they were using for their everyday purchases. And you heard Charla Woodruff testify, and she said there is no way my mom would ever give him that card. The only charges in that month prior that are out of town are to Abilene for a Saturday and Sunday when they go to visit him, and then when they're visiting Charla in Arkansas. All the rest of those charges are local charges, where they were using that card on a daily basis to pay for food, to pay for stuff at Walgreens. There is no way she gave him that card. He stole that card from her that night when he stole those wallets. And what else did he take out of those wallets? Some cash. Because we know the following morning what had happened, and it's right here in State's Exhibit 246. He gets a car wash in Abilene at 8 o'clock in the morning. 8:30 in the morning. Okay, so he drops Robert off 6 o'clock. 8:30 in the morning, he's going and getting the car washed. And how does he pay? He pays with cash. He had $20 then. Didn't have any money before, but now he's got $20. And you may say, well, why didn't he get that out before? Because he had thrown those wallets in the luggage, and he was with friends that whole time. He was in a hurry after he murdered his parents, and he didn't have time to go through those wallets. He just threw them in the luggage. And it's not until he drops Robert Martinez off that morning that he can start going through the luggage and see what he got exactly. Oh gosh, got $20. Let me go wash the truck. And then that following afternoon, there are 2 calls to Capital One, and it's not the customer service line, it's the activation number. And what he finds out from the credit records of his parents, they both have Capital One cards. So in the middle of all this horrible anxiousness that's going on with Charla and his family calling him about have you seen Mom and Dad? What's going on? We haven't talked to them. At 4:59 and 5 o'clock that afternoon, when he's finding out that his parents are dead, he is calling Capital One activation number trying to activate some cards. That was the slide I was looking for a minute ago. What do we know about what his parents were telling him about ACU? His chances were up. Brandon knew that. He knew that the gig was up. His ride with the parents and being at ACU was over. He started that semester with 14 hours. He ended up being dropped from 3 of his classes with a WF, which means withdrawn failing, by his teachers. And he's begging that last teacher to remain in the class, okay? And when does all of that take place? The emails with his teacher are that week before he goes home to see his parents. And he's begging her, please don't drop me from this class. I really, really need to be in this class. And she says, I'm sorry, it's policy and I have to drop you. He's out of money. He's out of options. What's left? The insurance money. And he tells multiple people about that insurance money after the fact. He tells the hairdresser. That lady didn't even know him, but she was so disturbed by what he said, she felt like she had to tell the police. Talking about his wealth and his houses, telling his friend Alex Ruley that he's going to be coming into a lot of money with insurance proceeds. And this is what ultimately Brandon can't get around. He cannot account for where he was that night. And I want you to think about what's going on that week before he gives his statement to the police. His parents have been murdered, found murdered. And he knows from talking to his aunt, from talking to his family members, from talking to his attorneys that were representing him at the time, that he is going to be a suspect. He was the last person to see them. He knows that. Don't you think that he is going to try to think about where he was and have that down and account for his whereabouts that entire night? And so he starts out saying they got pizza at 6:15, ate, and left. It was still daylight when I left. And he says that both in the Channel 11 interview and the interview that he gives to the police officers. It was light when I left. Says I got to the Heath house, and I left the Heath house at 8. And we know when he started heading to Dallas. We've got those records. The cell records make it clear. He didn't start heading that way until around 10:45. So where is he? There are hours there that are unaccounted for in his version of the events. He was murdering his parents. That's where he was. And they don't have the answers to explain that to you. Thank you.
Miss Ferguson?
May it please the court, Ms. McFarland, Mr. Guerrero. Ladies and gentlemen, as Ms. McFarland said, this is my chance to talk to you. This is the last chance that I have to talk to you about Brandon. This is my last duty in representing Brandon. I want to talk to you a little bit about the charge. You have your copy there in front of you. I would like to direct your attention to just a couple of the things that are in the charge. Page 3 in paragraph 8. All persons are presumed innocent until the state proves to you beyond a reasonable doubt that the person is guilty. The burden remains right here. It never shifts. They have to tell you what happened. They have to prove it to you. The presumption of innocence alone is enough to acquit. If you have reasonable doubts about the state's case, you have to acquit. Now, when we started this case, Mr. Guerrero, in his opening statement, the lies of Brandon Woodruff, are catching up to him. And they talk about Mr. Woodruff living in a fantasy world. I'm thinking the prosecution is in a fantasy world. I'm not sure we sat through the same trial because they have presented their version and left out everything that doesn't support their theory. Just like Texas Ranger Jeff Collins didn't want to hear about anything that didn't support his tunnel vision view that Brandon Woodruff was guilty. So, let's go through the case. Ms. McFarland says there's no evidence that Brandon was a model. You heard testimony from his friends, he was talking about it. Todd Williams, his wife Tracy, his aunt went so far as to take him to the mall to try for something for modeling. Why would they not do that? Because you were going to have to pay them to get the opportunity to go. He went to Florida for a modeling trip. They want to talk to you about this truck. Mr. Guerrero and Ms. McFarland have both told you that this was Norma's special truck that no one got to drive. Charla Woodruff sat up here and told you, Brandon drove it more than I did because I know he was pulling horse trailers with it. Randall Luntz, the next door neighbor, oh yeah, Brandon's truck broke and he drove his mom's truck to school. Everyone agrees he took it to the prom. Tammy Keel, Grace Jackson, Brandon took us to lunch right before he went to ACU, in that truck. Mom was not with him. Dee Glover, whose testimony we read, Brandon came up to the feed store a couple of times in that truck without his mom. But the state is telling you he was never allowed to drive it, that no one ever drove it. But their own witnesses are telling you different. Who's telling you the lies? The house, he hated it. He hated that double wide. Yeah, he hated it so much that he came home on weekends to work on it with his parents, to help build a barn, to help them move into it. How do we know that? Dennis Woodruff's sister, Kathy Latch, talked to Dennis on October 16th in the afternoon. Said, yeah, we worked that boy so hard, we're not sure he's coming back. Hates this house, but he's helping and working to move his parents into it. Now, the most offensive part of this prosecution is the fact that the state wants you to infer that because Brandon Woodruff is either gay or bisexual, he must be a murderer. If he's going to lie to people about his sexual identity, he's guilty of killing people. That is the most offensive part of this case. The prosecution is hoping, relying on the evil assumption that you will be, because we're small town East Texas, that you're going to be blinded by prejudice and say, if he's gay or bisexual, well, then he must be a murderer. That's offensive. It offends me, and I hope it offended you. Now, they want to talk about his timeline. He can't account for his time. He's got hours missing. What's the important time period? What's the important time frame? Doesn't matter where he was up until 9 o'clock. The state's own witnesses proved Dennis and Norma Woodruff were alive. Norma Woodruff talked to Opal Johnson on the phone. Charla told you about it. 9 o'clock Sunday night, 25-minute phone conversation. Opal Johnson told you about talking to her. Michelle Lee talked to you about talking to her. They were alive from 9 to 9:25. Now, State's Exhibit 209, prepared by Michelle Stern, the investigator for the state. 9:27 p.m. Brandon calls Alex Rully. So, I guess he's just waiting for his mother to get off the phone so that in 2 minutes he can jump out with a gun and a knife, kill his parents, and then run and pick up the phone and call Alex Rully. Then, 5 minutes after that, he runs back to pick up the phone to call Morgan Lee. 9 minutes after that, at 9:41 p.m., Morgan Lee calls him. The chart says that they had just had a call that lasted 218 seconds, 60 seconds in a minute, almost a 4-minute phone call. Now the state would have you believe that Brandon Woodruff is killing his parents, getting his cell phone and calling Alex Rully, putting it down, getting a knife, stabbing his parents, picking up his phone, calling Morgan Lee, putting the knife down, picking up the phone, answering it, talking to Morgan Lee. Now, let's not forget their witness puts him at the Heath house at around 10 o'clock. He doesn't say that he wasn't there before 10 o'clock. He just said that's when he noticed him. Their investigator said it takes 20 to 25 minutes to drive from the Royse City house to the Heath house. Well, assuming Brandon killed his parents, he had to immediately leave the house in Royse City, jump in his mother's truck with the gun, with the knife, with the bloody clothes, with the wallets, and drive to Heath, where he's then in a rush because he's got to change out the vehicles. And you heard witness after witness, Randall Luntz, Charla, everybody. They kept that Chevy truck backed up, hooked up to that stock trailer so it wouldn't get stolen. So, he's got to move the Dodge truck, go unhook the Chevy truck, move the Chevy truck, bring the Dodge truck back in front of it. Oh, and he's also deciding that he's going to wrap up the magic dagger because, it grows, wrapped it in plastic, and leave it in the barn at the Heath house. He's supposed to be so fiendishly clever that he can tell all these lies and lead this double life. And he disappears with his parents' wallet and a gun that's never found, bloody clothes that are never found. But he's going to take that knife, wrap it in plastic, and leave it like a Christmas present in the Heath house, where, by the way, it isn't found for 2.5 years. 10:15, Robert Martinez calls him. 2-minute phone call. Martinez testified, and he couldn't tell you which times calls were to voicemail and which times he talked to Brandon. But he told you he talked to Brandon. Jansen Herring, his girlfriend, told you she talked to Brandon because she made the decision, we're going to pull off into Denny's, you're going to have to meet us there, Brandon. 10:34 p.m. He's on the phone to Alex Rully, about a 2-minute phone call. And again, this is a call Brandon initiates. 10:38, calls Morgan Lee. 10:47, has a 2-minute phone call with Robert Martinez. Now, 10:49 p.m. The only call, or the first call that starts showing up on Brandon's cell phone records, he's down at 6:35 and I-30. The Heath house is way back there. It had to take some time to get from the Heath house to here. The state can't account for that time. The state would have you believe he had time to murder his parents, clean up, hide everything, get in the car, and then go over to Heath. The timeline doesn't fit, ladies and gentlemen. He doesn't have the time to do it based on what the state itself has told you is the critical hour. Yes, he may be unaccounted for his time at 7 o'clock. He may have been confused. Alex Rully, James Britt, Jansen Herring, and Robert Martinez, not a one of them had their timelines correct until the state stuck toll records and cell phone records under their nose. All of them had different times. Alex Rully testified and said, "I thought Brandon got to my house at 10:30. He's about an hour off. Is he a diabolical liar? Did he help Brandon murder his parents? No. He's a teenager, a young adult. He's not paying attention to the time." Their timeline does not work. He didn't physically have the time to do it. And by the way, he's on that cell phone. If you're following the state's timeline, he's on that cell phone the time he's killing his parents. "Hi, Morgan. I'm going to shoot my parents. I'll call you right back." Click. "Hi, Morgan. I finished shooting my parents. I want to call you right back after I stab them." Click. Makes no sense. And that's the same cell phone that the state didn't have any interest in getting the proper, appropriate records for. All you heard them talk about is Ranger Collins and Deputy King interviews. They didn't have time. They have time to put someone on trial for his life, and they don't have time to do a proper investigation. And they don't check the cell phone for DNA. This is a bloody crime scene, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not going to show you the pictures again, but you've seen them. This was a bloody crime scene. They didn't check the cell phone. Now, credit cards. Everyone is familiar with the financial situation we're in now. Young people are irresponsible with credit cards. That's a given fact. That doesn't mean people are out killing their parents. And how Brandon learned about irresponsibility from his own parents. You heard the testimony. His parents had gotten into trouble and had to go through credit counseling, and then turned around and ran up more debt again. Like father, like son. Brandon had permission to have credit cards of his parents. How do we know that? Because Dennis's sister Kathy sat up here and told you, "Oh, I talked to Dennis about it. He said, yeah, the kids needed to have credit cards." They tried to cross her and say, "Oh, wasn't it just a gas card?" She said, "No, it was a credit card in case he needed cash." Doesn't fit. And if he stole these credit cards from his parents because he's out of money, why is there never a charge on any of these cards? Brandon Woodruff never used that debit card that was found in his wallet. Never. They have not shown you one charge on there after October 16th. The bank records show the parents used that account, and there are charges to Verizon or Vantage. There's no charges from Brandon. The truck that he's supposed to have killed his parents over and taken, and stolen credit cards from his parents, he drives back to Abilene that night, fills it up, uses his own credit card. Doesn't whip out that card from his parents that nobody is going to report stolen because they're dead and he can start using it all he wants. No, he gets out his own and pays. They talk about Brandon's fantasy world, about his parents' wealth or lack thereof. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you've heard all kinds of testimony about the horses, the lambs, the animals that were being shown, the stock trailers. That takes money. It's expensive to keep large animals. It's expensive to buy them. It's expensive to show them. It's expensive to board them. And you're relying on what these people's impression or what their understanding of what Brandon said. Well, he said he was moving to a bigger house. Bigger could mean acreage, bigger land where they can keep their animals. And that house, there wasn't any plan for Brandon to ever have to come back there again and live full time. Kathy Latch told you, Norma and Dennis, empty nest. They had one room that Brandon and Charla would alternate in when they came to visit. The other bedroom was going to be Dennis's office, Dolly Parton room, just like he had at the Heath house. They said Brandon told you he hated the house. No, he never said that. He said he was concerned about the neighborhood. And they say, "Oh, well, Deputy Collins told you that," or "Ranger Collins told you that there were only 2 calls out there." The same Ranger Collins that didn't want the phone tested was too busy to get the cell phone records and thought that it would be a good idea to send other officers into the house to videotape the crime scene in the dark so that they can wander around blind, stepping on stuff and knocking stuff over, which you've heard the officers testify happened. But you also heard again Kathy Latch, a neighbor, called her and told her about shootings in the neighborhood. This wasn't Brandon, told Kathy. This was the lady across the street. That's why they moved so quickly to take some of the furniture out of the house. They were told that the house might get broken into. Kathy said there had been shootings and shotguns, people shooting guns and shotguns. Gee, what was one of the bits of evidence that Ranger Collins talked about? A spent shotgun shell over by the back door of the Heath house? Dennis and Norma didn't have a shotgun. Who fired it? How did it get there? But we didn't bother to ask that question because they know Brandon did it. They want you to believe the hairdresser. This is the same woman that came in here and told you that Charla fell out on that Friday and had to go to the hospital. Brought Charla in here. Charla said that never happened. Never happened. They're so desperate to convince you that Brandon is guilty that they brought William Pardun in here, the snitch, 5-time felon, and who had to admit he was mad at Brandon because he thought Brandon got him kicked out of the medical tank. And he told the ranger in his interview, "I'm going to get that little fucker." Well, he tried. He came up here and tried it. Oh, but he didn't get a deal. 4 prior felonies, catches a felony in April of 2008, gets 5 years probation when the minimum sentence is 25 to 99 or life in TDC. You think Mr. Pardun's got a little bit of motivation here to further the lies about Brandon Woodruff? Now, they talk about Brandon's lies. Well, let's go through Brandon's statement. Came into town, spent Saturday with Morgan Lee, ran around buying sheep, a lamb. Randall Luntz verified it. Michelle Lee verified it. Morgan Lee verified it. The cell phone records that they trotted out verified it, showed them going down to Waco just like Brandon said. Sunday, with his parents working on the house, told that to the Rangers. Kathy Latch verified it. She talked to Dennis that day. They say Brandon was giving a timeline to the Ranger. Listen to the interview. Those attorneys that were supposedly representing Brandon, the great advice that they gave him, don't argue with the Ranger. So he followed their advice. But you listen to the number of times that Ranger Collins says, "Oh, so it was 7 o'clock. Oh, so then you got there at 8. Oh, so then you left at 9:30. Ranger Collins is the one suggesting that timeline, not Brandon. So when Brandon says on the Channel 11 interview, "I never said I left between 6 and 7, didn't. Ranger Collins suggested it to him, and he said, "Don't know." But Alex Rully didn't know the times. Jansen Herring didn't know the times. James Britt didn't know the times. But they're just confused and off. Only Brandon is the nefarious liar if he's off on his time. And he told you, pizza with my parents. Independently verified. You saw it on the bank records for his parents, Milano's Pizza, Royse City, October 16th. You saw it on the crime scene video because the pizza box is in the refrigerator. Independently verified. Brandon said, "I left after the pizza. I was going to go do something for my mom's horses. I called my folks about 7:30. Says that in the Ranger's statement. Tammy Keel came in here and told you, "Yeah, I talked to Brandon that night sometime around 7 and told him, 'Don't go to the barn and bathe the horses. I've already put them out.' So Brandon calls his mother to tell her, 'I'm not going to do it because they've already been put out for the night.' 7:36 p.m. on the state's exhibits, they verified it. It's on the caller ID of the victim's phone. Charla verified it. She saw it. Brandon is telling the truth. Brandon said he went to the Heath house. He did. He told the Rangers everywhere he went Sunday night. He told them. He told them that he was supposed to pick up Robert Martinez originally in Denton, but he was running late and they were getting mad at him. You heard Jansen Herring and Robert Martinez talk about that. Verifies what Brandon Woodruff said. The toll records, or the phone records, verify what Brandon said about driving down I-30 to 635 and trying to go into North Dallas to meet them at the Denny's. You saw their little cell phone tower display. 9009 Skillman, I think it was. The Denny's restaurant. Yeah, Brandon told them he went to the Denny's. I met them there. Then Jansen went back to Denton, and we went to Plano. Toll records verified it. Alex Rully and James Britt and Robert Martinez all verified it. We stayed at the house about an hour. Robert Martinez, Alex Rully, James Britt all verified. The toll records verify it. They came back through the toll heading south into Dallas roughly an hour after they had gone up into it the first time in Plano. They went to a club. Stayed at the club about 2 hours. Toll records verify. Robert Martinez said he wasn't sure how long, he just thought it was too long. Alex Rully and James Britt, yeah, we were there about 2 hours. Toll records show the same thing. Came back through the toll records, back through the toll booth. He dropped off dropped off Alex and James and went back to ACU with Robert. Robert verified it. The gas purchase in Grand Prairie verifies it. And you heard Tom Cruise and Eric Gentry, classmates of his, both said, yeah, he got in about 6 a.m. He's given a detailed timeline of all his movements on the night he's supposed to kill his parents. And every bit of it has been independently verified by the state's own evidence. Now, the suitcase. Oh, well, he must have stuffed the wallet and the gun and hid all that in his suitcase because he was in such a rush. He's in such a rush to get rid of bloody clothes, gun, that he shoves it in a suitcase. But he stops and takes the time to take the magic dagger and wrap it in plastic and leave it at the Heath house. And you heard from the police officers. Oh, well, the Heath house was too messy. We couldn't search it. It was too cluttered. Brandon Bobbitt can spend 2 weeks labeling bags, but he can't search a crime scene. Ranger Collins, I wasn't really in charge. I was just sort of directing some of it. Joel Gibson and Tommy Granfield up here. Ranger Collins was in charge. Everybody is passing the buck. Wasn't my job. Wasn't my responsibility. They tested the suitcase twice. Noel Martin and Tyler looked at it. No evidence. So then they sent it to the DPS lab in Dallas. Nothing. No blood, no gunshot residue, nothing. Brandon was unsure of his sexuality. He was experimenting. He's at ACU, a Church of Christ institution that does not approve of same-sex lifestyle. You heard Eric. Alex Rully and James Britt both talk about that. As a gay person, it is not at all uncommon to have some friends with whom you remain closeted and some with who you are open. What was in that suitcase? Something that would have confirmed for Robert Martinez that Brandon Woodruff liked boys. And the problems that would cause him at ACU, he didn't want that found out. Now, let's talk about their evidence. They've told you throughout the entirety of this case there was a trail of blood from the bathroom, or from the living room to the bathroom. James Nichols came and testified. The DNA guy, no blood. No blood in the bathroom, no blood on the shower liner. Oh, and the bathroom is an interesting point too. Their theory is that whoever killed the Woodruffs washed up. Ranger Collins sat up here and told you that when he checked the bathtub sometime after 9 o'clock on Tuesday, October 18th, some 48 hours after we know Brandon left the house and hasn't been back, that there's water in the bathtub. There's water in the shower area. Tells me someone was there after 48 hours. More recently, like within 10 or 12. The dagger, or the sword. I'm calling it the magic dagger because it grows. Eric Gentry said that blade is only 6 inches long. That's a sword, ladies and gentlemen. That blade is a foot long. Adrienne Lynch from ACU, they had her up there testifying. She told you, oh yeah, he had a dagger. Blade was about 6 inches long. But did you notice something? They wouldn't show it to her. They never showed her that dagger, that sword, because she wouldn't identify it. She would say, that's not what I remember. The DNA on the knife, the sword, we have no idea how it got there. And it's under the skulls up by the handle where you would hold it. If maybe Dennis Woodruff, as Kathy Latch said, she has no reason to suspect that maybe Dennis didn't wrap it, packing for moving. And if you're moving in that house with all the materials and the mess that's in that barn, it's very likely you could cut your hand on something while you're moving stuff around. But it's the magic dagger because whoever washed it could wash away all the DNA of Norma Woodruff, who was also, supposedly, stabbed by this very same weapon. But it doesn't wash away Dennis's, and water magically doesn't get up under the skull to wash away that part. The gun. We don't know what gun was used. No one has been able to tell you. They can tell you a large caliber, and that is it. We've had no evidence that Brandon Woodruff ever owned a large caliber handgun. And Ranger Collins told you up here on the stand that he had determined that there were several people who had access to that gun besides Brandon Woodruff. The wounds, the autopsy. The deepest wound on Dennis or Norma, 5 3/4 inches, is not even half the length of the suspected weapon. No bone hid, nothing to stop that knife from going all the way in. And then told you that this was done in a rage and in a frenzy, and it was a fast attack. So, in a rage and a frenzy, you're going to drive a knife in and stop halfway, less than halfway? You heard Dr. Carter testify. Dallas did an incomplete autopsy. They didn't do their job. You heard those words right out of Dr. Salzberger's mouth about the hairs in Norma Woodruff's hand and whether or not those should be tested. That's not my job. Her form that she submitted, she wrote on there, hairs in Norma's hand, ? Didn't know whose hair those were in the right hand. And then says, I forgot to ask Hunt County what tests I wanted, or what tests they wanted run. And Hunt County showed no interest in pursuing that either, because the hairs were blonde and Brandon Woodruff's hair was black. Witness after witness told you he had black hair the weekend of October 16th, but Norma Woodruff tried to tell you who killed her. She knew she could not testify and leave a written statement, a written record of her attacker. So she did the next best thing. She got hair in her hand, the same hand that has a defensive mark, the hair that tells you who her attacker is. The state of Texas couldn't be bothered to test it. Didn't want to, didn't care. Forgot because they had already decided that it was Brandon Woodruff. And they were certainly not going to let any facts get in the way of that assumption. Now, they talk about Brandon's lies about problems with his classmates. Kathy Latch sat up here, told you she talked to Dennis about Brandon's problems with the Etheringtons. This isn't some fantasy made up by Brandon. Dennis suspected Mike of poisoning the dog, egging Brandon's truck, killing Brandon's lamb at the egg barn. Kathy Latch told you she had discussed it with Dennis. That was Dennis Woodruff's suspicions.
5 minutes, Miss Ferguson.
Todd Williams told you he advised Brandon to stay away from Mike. He was aware of the problems. We've got Norma Etherington calling the sheriff's office before it's even been confirmed there's a murder on the morning of October 19th, trying to put Brandon in the frame. We've got Mike Etherington, less than 6 hours after the body or after the crime scene has been exited, on the early morning hours of October 19th, starting to call Brandon. *67. If you're calling to give your condolences and someone is not answering the phone, wouldn't you just leave a message? Ranger Collins confirmed by talking to Mike Etherington that yes, there had been heated text messages exchanged. Mike confirmed that. But the state didn't want to look, didn't want to check into anything that might upset their neat preconceived idea that Brandon Woodruff is the one. Are you bothered by this, ladies and gentlemen? Do the ballistics concern you? Does the lack of a gun concern you? Does the inconsistency of the knife with the wounds inflicted bother you? It bothers you because they haven't proved their case, and you have a reasonable doubt. Ms. McFarland mentioned a fantasy. This case puts me to mind of The Wizard of Oz in that scene where, after they killed the Wicked Witch, Dorothy and the Tin Man, they all come back to see Oz. And they've got the great big green floating head and the smoke and the flames, the big technological show. And little Toto is over in the corner pulling the curtain back on the truth. And the big green head says, "Pay no attention to the man in the corner. Look here, look here. Watch the big green floating head. Watch the technology. Watch the show." The truth is over off to the side. The state of Texas should have been a little Toto in this case. It should have been ferreting out the truth. And when you have gone back to deliberate and you compare that timeline and see the physical impossibility, you're going to know the lies versus the truth. And you're going to know that the truth in this case is that Brandon Woodruff did not kill his parents. The truth in this case is Brandon Woodruff is not guilty. Don't be intimidated by a high publicity case. Do your duty. Do what you know is the truth. Acquit Brandon Woodruff. Thank you.
Thank you, Miss Ferguson. Mr. Guerrero.
May it please the court, Ms. Ferguson, Mr. Davis, Mr. Woodruff. Being gay doesn't make you a murderer. But shooting and stabbing your parents does. And that's exactly what Brandon Woodruff did. He stabbed them, we know, with this dagger. You simply cannot get around the fact that Dennis Woodruff's blood is on both sides of the inside of this skull. You can't get around that. You can't get around the fact that Eric Gentry, his roommate, Tom Cruise, Tim Applewhite, all of them saw that dagger belonging to Mr. Woodruff. And Adrienne Lynch said that she never really saw it. So of course we wouldn't show it to her. We showed it to those that said, yeah, I remember a medieval dagger. Yeah, I remember seeing it. Yeah, I remember it was Brandon's. Yeah, I remember him being proud of it. Yeah, I remember him talking about he got it from doing his horse thing. This evidence, like all the other evidence, points to one person, and that's Brandon Woodruff. And Ms. Ferguson can talk about Mike Etherington and the Etheringtons? Are you kidding me? You heard Charla tell you that Norma Etherington and her mom were friends and worked in 4-H for years. Brandon, in his own statement, said that he and Mike were friends from 6th to 7th grade, did 4-H together. Brandon is the one that disassociates himself from his high school friends, starts hanging out with a new crowd. Brandon, as you heard Ranger Collins testify, is the one that's on MySpace, saying derogatory terms about these other people. And you heard Kathy Locke tell you what you already know, that in a community where there's something as tragic as a murder like this, the news spreads like wildfire. Ranger Collins testified that it's common for them to be at a scene and the news be showing up. Kathy told you that she picked up Charla and Magnolia and was driving back to Texarkana that Tuesday night when they found the bodies. And she was getting a call from her friend's husband in Frisco who had already found out. People who knew this family and had loved and cared for the Woodruffs started calling each other, started calling relatives, calling friends, calling cousins, trying to figure out what had happened. Because at first, they only knew that the bodies had been found, trying to ask and offer condolences. And included in those people calling, understandably, were Mike and Norma Etherington, one of Norma's best friends, one of Brandon's former close friends. Not surprisingly, on a day that they found out somebody close to them has been found dead, and then subsequently found murdered, they're going to start calling each other. And their calls are going to really increase that day. Ladies and gentlemen, you heard Ranger Collins say he looked into everything. He took Brandon as an honest person and followed those leads, and they kept going nowhere. I take that back. They kept going somewhere, back to Brandon Woodruff. And so we have tried to focus you on what they don't want you to focus on, and that's what actually happened and who actually did this. He didn't just murder his parents, ladies and gentlemen. This is premeditated. This is him leaving that weekend and taking the dagger that he has in his dorm room, that he's had for months with him. Driving from Denton with Robert Martinez that night and telling him, we're coming back in a new truck. How does he know they're coming back in a new truck? Because he knows that he's going to murder his parents and that this is going to be the one weekend they're not going to say no to him when he says, I want the truck. He knows. We know from Morgan Lee that week they had planned on him coming in to help her with that lamb. He also knew, as you heard from Michelle and Morgan Lee, that the Lees were going to be gone that weekend in Poetry, where they were every weekend. And so he knows he's been in that house time and time again, and he's walked up those stairs, as Michelle Lee described to you, that as soon as you come up that stairs, you see in plain view that hanging holster with that Colt 45. When he was leaving that weekend, he knew that opportunity he was going to have on Saturday to get that gun. And not only did he tell Robert we're going to come back in a new truck, but then when he did come back in that new truck on Tuesday, he told Adrienne Lynch, and you heard her testify, I took the truck. My parents didn't want me to take the truck, but I took it anyway. And I asked her how did he explain how he was able to take the truck, even though his parents didn't want him to. No. He knew when he left what was going to happen. And not only did he have an opportunity to take this gun, but he had an opportunity to take a gun, took a revolver. There were cartridges found at the scene, a .45 large caliber, a gun that shoots 45 large caliber bullets, Autopsy immediately determines a large caliber gun. Then when Noah Martin gets in there and starts looking at that couch, he finds a slug, which, lo and behold, had the same class characteristics, not just caliber, but other class characteristics as the bullets and the ammunition found right there that Mike Lee brought into the sheriff's office and said, I don't know if this has anything to do with it. Here's the ammunition. Here's the holster with the missing Colt 45. Just happenstance? Just coincidence? No. Premeditation. More importantly, we've learned about this gun, and we learned it from Michelle Lee that it's a Western-style Colt 45 with wooden handles. We heard wooden handles from two people, ladies and gentlemen. The owner of that gun and the defendant's cellmate. The defendant's cellmate didn't just know about the house in Royse and the Chevy and the Camry and the Mitsubishi and his ranch house in Poetry, but he knew about the wooden handles because the defendant on a couple of times had occasion to ask him, how long is a gun with wooden handles going to float? Two people, the owner of the gun and the defendant's cellmate, are asking about a wooden-handled gun. And when did they discover that gun missing? That Monday. After he was there that weekend. And after he was there, as you heard Morgan Lee testify, with at least 20 minutes unsupervised. He's the one that insisted on taking a shower. Although in his statement he says, I've never showered before at Morgan's house. Listen to that. He had 20 minutes in that house on Saturday when Morgan Lee wasn't around. When Mr. and Mrs. Lee were not around. When he had the Camry outside to get that done. Take it off that holster and put it in the trunk. Put it under the seat or put it in his bag or put it wherever he wanted. And then sit back on that couch so when Morgan Lee came down the stairs, she would see him just watching TV. We go to Sunday, October 16th, and he gets up in the morning. As you heard from Tammy Keel, he goes over to her stables, and you look at the cell records, and you notice that he's not really making a lot of calls between 9 o'clock and noon. That's probably when he's at the stables with Ms. Keel. And what you also notice is that from noon until 6:30, he and Morgan are burning up the phone, calling each other back and forth. And Morgan would tell you that they were communicating about him coming to the ag barn later that evening. When I showed her the cell records, you see that gap between 6:30 and 9:30, where he goes and meets her at the ag barn, where she said he came and met me at the ag barn. Where is he between noon and 6:30 on that Sunday? He's with his parents. He's spending the day with them, helping them with the barn, doing whatever. And in particular, at some point around 4 o'clock, he's having that conversation with his dad about his sexuality, a conversation Dennis told Kathy. And if you look at those texts that were in that green binder, you'll notice that in that communication with Morgan, he says, I'm talking to my parents right now. I'll call you back later. Right around the same time that Kathy told you that she got the call from Dennis. Ms. Ferguson talked a lot about the timeline, and I want you to focus on that because that tells the story. His timeline is the only one that I can verify. Yes, they had pizza about 6:30, 6:15. The defendant tells you that. You see the pizza box there. We're not disputing that. Yes, he left Royse City about 6:30 or 7. He says he then drove to Heath, took 22, 23 minutes. Ms. Stern testified, yes, it takes that time to drive. He says he's at Heath for about 30 minutes and, quote, leaves at 8 o'clock at the latest. Never mentions going to see Morgan Lee at the ag barn during any of that time. And then we know that at 10:51 to 11 o'clock, he's meeting Robert Martinez. What we don't know, if we stick to the defendant's timeline, is what he's doing between 8 p.m. and 11 p.m. But we do know.
5 minutes, Mr. Guerrero.
And what we know, ladies and gentlemen, is that he leaves from 6 o'clock to 6:15. He leaves Royse City. He's at the ag barn. And between 9:30 and 10:30, he's unaccounted for. What we do know is from 9:41 to 10:34, he's not making any calls. He's being called a lot by people, 1 minute, less than 1 minute voicemail. You heard Robert Martinez say he didn't pick up his calls, 9:30 to 10:30. All the toll records after that is confirming his story. But what happens after 9:30 to 10:30 is not really in question. What's in question, ladies and gentlemen, is what's happening at that house. He called. He does make that call at 7:30, and he calls them maybe to tell them, oh, I forgot the mail on the bed. Or, oh, I forgot, my friend Robert is taking too long. I'm going to have to come back. He needs to give an explanation for why he's coming back in that house so he doesn't surprise them. And he comes back in that house and he sits down on that couch and they're watching TV for a little bit. Hey, I'm going to go to the restroom. And they're watching TV and they're not looking at him. And he goes and he gets the dagger and the gun, which he had all day to hide under the bed or keep in a bag. And he comes back and mom and dad are still watching that TV. And he just without boom. And then boom, boom. And Norma is trying to protect herself and trying to get under Dennis. And she takes that shot to the hand, the 2 shots here. She spills over. He just takes a step in to get that 3rd shot that's downward. He gets the dagger and he starts stabbing Dennis 9 times. He hits his mom once with the point as well. He walks away and he's putting his shirt and covering up the dagger. And he puts it in the bag, whatever he's kept it in. Puts all that, takes off his clothes, puts them in there, gets in the shower. Then uses the towels there. Maybe he brings his own towels, gets in the car. The reason there's no blood in the truck is because he showered. He has all that stuff covered. Goes back to the house. You heard from Lunds that he's there between 10:15. He gets there a little after 10 o'clock. Takes the dogs out probably around 10:30. Puts the dagger in there, in that garage. Or maybe he puts it in the barn and it got moved. In that garage. Or maybe he puts it in the barn and it got moved to the... Puts it in the garage and it got moved to the barn after the flood. Or he puts it in the barn itself. On the way up to Dallas, plenty of opportunity to throw it in the lake. Or maybe he keeps it all in that bag and discards it when he gets to ACU, which is why he freaks out when James and Alex are looking through his bag. You know, ladies and gentlemen, Norma and Dennis tell you what happened through that scene. Only somebody who knew them and was as comfortable with them as he was could have gotten within inches and no reaction from them. Inches before he shot. They're telling you who did it. Norma's truck, her Chevy truck, which she adored, which everybody told you was her pride and joy, which she would have never let him take, that he took anyway, is telling you who did this. Most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, Dennis's blood in the skull of this dagger is telling you who did this. You know the truth because of his lies. And the truth is that he's guilty of capital murder. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Guerrero. All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's time to begin your deliberations. Ms. Gooch, if you would return after you get your purse. You've got copies of the charge, but the one that needs to be filled out is the one that has a file mark on the front and my signature on the next to the last page.
Well, there you have it. What do you think? It's now time for you, the American Justice Army, to deliberate. You've heard all about the trial. You've heard all the closing arguments. So what do you think? Well, let's see what the jury decided after just 5 hours of deliberation. Remember, this is a capital murder trial, and there were 5 hours of deliberation. Do you really think that anyone other than our lone holdout had any kind of open mind? As I've heard about these deliberations, if that one person was not a holdout, it would have only taken about 10 minutes. Basically, it was just 5 hours of the rest of the jurors beating up on this lady until she finally gave in to the rest of the homophobic bullies. All right, let's see what they said. This is a recording from the actual trial. It's hard to listen to, but here you go.
All right, be seated, please. Before I announce the verdict, I want to warn everyone here, I know there's high tensions on both sides given the circumstances of the victims and the defendant. I don't want any outbreaks on either side when I announce the verdict. We, the jury, find beyond a reasonable doubt the defendant Brandon Dale Woodruff guilty of capital murder as charged in the indictment. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for giving us 3 weeks of your life. Appreciate the sacrifice and the labor we've made. I know that $40 a day can't be able to pay the decision of this type of case. I have previously instructed you that you do not discuss the case with anyone. Now I release you from those. You may discuss the case with anyone that you wish.
So there you have it. Guilty of capital murder. Do you agree with the verdict? Let us know in the comments. Now, once the verdict is read, the sentence is automatic. The state was not seeking the death penalty, and in a capital case, the only other sentence available is life without parole, which is exactly what Brandon got.
Mr. Woodruff, in accordance with the verdict of the jury, now sentence you to life without parole in the next Department of Criminal Justice Institutional Division, and you to the sheriff.
All right, so once Brandon is sentenced, it's time for the, quote, victim impact statements to be read. First up is Charla. She rambles on, and with the recording that we have, a lot of it is very hard to hear. But I have had someone try to professionally enhance and clarify the audio as much as possible. Here are the parts that are clear enough to hear. If you can't understand all of the words, either look in the description or take a gander on our YouTube channel where we'll have all the words transcribed. As you'll hear, it's once again all about Charla. It's disgusting, but here it is.
Brandon, and we have not given any thought to the effects of your decision. I hope now you pay attention. So many people care for you. So many people love you. And I only wonder if you realize what you've done. Even knowingly and willingly murdered our parents. You've taken so much from everyone. You've stolen my parents. You selfishly chose a life for you. And now even that is gone. You didn't see the anguish, the tears, and the hurt in people who have never done anything but love our parents and us. I wish for 1 second you could have watched my mom have all realized their baby girl was gone. Or if you could see how Mimi would react to losing her once a son. What about the little ones? The ones that were too young or unborn. They will never know Uncle Dennis and Aunt Norma. I wish you could be around when Olivia asked, "Who's your mom and dad?" It breaks my heart. What did they do? I now have a daughter who will never know her grandparents. Norma will never feel the hugs or know the love that Mom and Dad had. And Mom and Dad were robbed of the joy of becoming a grandparent. You know that if you would have just turned to anyone for help, you would have gotten it. In fact, think of Edie and Todd, who have stood beside you this whole way. Think about their children and family and their lives. They've been over backwards trying to help you and in turn missing out on 3 years that can never be replaced. If you just reached out and before you got too far, I promise the commitment would still have been the same. The only thing different is the grief that you have caused the rest of us. What about Mimi? Mimi has been by your side since day one, and in turn hurting other grandchildren. There are many times you can see her whole world that grandchildren nearby were often put off or ignored. And 3 years later, she has learned the real truth of you. But what about the others whose feelings have been hurt? Do you have anything to say to them for the loss of time spent with their only grandparent? Remember when we'd sit around for hours playing skip-ball with Mama and Papa? We could play for hours. After your decision, Papa only played a couple more times before the stress of everything took his health and his spirits. Have all cried? Yes, cried. I watched a very strong man cry for months, until he literally couldn't cry anymore. Your actions proved too much for his health, and we lost him too. I will never forget driving around the corner of my apartment complex and seeing me and Kathy and Heather standing outside. I instantly knew without words the conclusion of what I had sought out all day. Where were Mom and Dad? And they were gone. I realized immediately the true meaning of agony. Even now, there are days where that memory replays as if in slow motion. The horror and pain come back and leave me at a loss for words. My life was finally going ideal. I was in college and loving every moment of it. Mom and Dad were coming out to every ball game to watch me dance and had become strong mentors for me. And now it will never, ever be the same. I've been sad, angry, hurt, betrayed, and lost. I was barely 20 years old. I knew nothing of the real world, and in a moment I was expected to be in charge. I didn't even know the process for getting car insurance. Brandon, you made me plan a funeral. That thought still disgusts me. You made me pick out their flowers, their music, their clothing, and their caskets. I don't understand. To go out shopping for clothes to bury your parents in, no one should have to go through that. But then to know my own brother put me in that situation, you affected my ability to trust. I thought graduating from a police academy without Mom and Dad by my side was hard enough, but your deed continues to haunt me, as I was pregnant without my mother to console with, and I become a new mother without guidance from my own parents. I wish to get married one day, but Dad won't be there to walk me down the aisle. And when that day comes, it'll be just one more reminder of what you've done. What is supposed to be the happiest day of my life, you've ruined it too. It took hours for us to see each other that night, but I held you tight and I felt horrible knowing that you too were going through the pain that overwhelmed me. Within the weeks to come, my actions frustrated me, because you felt no pain. You knew all along where they were while I was panicking, and the hurt I was going through, you put it there. Mother's Day is just around the corner. Do you want to know what I'll get Mom? Flowers. Want to know what I got her last year? Flowers. And the year before that? Flowers. The only thing I can get her, Brandon, are flowers. Never would I ever get my mom flowers. She's just not that kind of person, and you know that. Your actions have left me with no other options. Christmases are rough too. Everyone tries to do special things, but one look around the room and I get sad. Our aunts and uncles have their kids, and on some occasions grandkids at their side, making memories that will last a lifetime. As for me, all I ever have now are memories of Mom and Dad. Never again will I be able to sneak around attempting to find my presents or open some bizarre gift that Mom just thought I would love. Do you know how hard it is to look at Dolly Parton? She's appeared on numerous TV shows in the last 3 years, along with releasing a couple new songs. Those are the times where I would immediately pick up the phone and call Dad, but he's not there. My biggest regret is that Mom called me. Mom called Mom's house that Sunday night, and I was right there. Mom even asked if I wanted to talk to Mom, and I told her no, that I would call her later. And guess what? I called back, and no answer. I had no idea it was actually my last chance to talk to my mom, to tell her about my day, to share my thoughts with her, or to simply hear her voice. My last chance to tell her that I loved her. My last chance, and I missed it. I never even got a chance to say goodbye. Forgive us of our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. We're not meant to be empty words. Brandon, I don't know if and when I will ever forgive you for what you did. I do know that I don't hate you, but with all my heart and soul, I hate and everything that's inside of me. I do hate your cruel and selfish decision to kill Mom and Dad. May God forgive you.
Next up is Brandon's cousin, Heather. This is Aunt Linda's daughter. She's reading the statement that her mom, Brandon's Aunt Linda Matthews, prepared. At least we learned where Charla got her, quote, "everything is about me" mantra from. I will apologize up front. This audio is also very hard to hear. But I guess we play the cards that were dealt. Here you go.
I just want to make clear that I'm reading this on behalf of my mother. So these words are from her. Writing this was not an easy task. Trying to put my feelings into words is difficult because in order to do that, I have to think about what happened, and I don't want to. I prefer to bury it somewhere deep inside and never examine it again. The words, they're both in the house, they're both dead, will haunt me forever. I felt like I was living in a nightmare, and I would wake up and it would all be a mistake, but it wasn't. I never dreamed it could get much worse when I was told my nephew, the one I loved and thought I knew, was being arrested for their deaths. I recently read the novel The Shack, and in there he talks about the moments of joy before the great sadness returns. The great sadness is a heavy quilt that weighs him down and almost smothers him at times. He talks about carrying great sadness everywhere he goes. I often feel the darkness, the fear, the anxiety closing in, and the effort it takes to fight it off is overwhelming. I miss Norma and Dennis unbelievably. My sister was one of my best friends. Someone who knew all my bad stuff but loved me anyway. Who was always there with advice, support, and love. And Dennis was more than just a brother-in-law. He was a true brother who gave the same as Norma. 3.5 years later, I still catch myself thinking, oh, I need to tell Norma this, she will love it. Only Norma's not there. Holidays have totally changed. Dennis always made us smile and laugh. One of my favorite memories is how Mom and I would be working in the kitchen and he would come through and grab one of us and start dancing around the kitchen to some tune he was singing loudly. There are lots of tears off and on throughout the holidays for all of us. But one thing that comes up every year is my youngest daughter, Heather, crying because her youngest daughter, Olivia, will never get to experience Christmas with Uncle Dennis and Aunt Norma. But it's affected me more than just missing them. A car accident, a household accident, anything but the way they died would have been easier. I've had a lot of anger at various stages and at various people. You, God, and even my sister. Why didn't she or Dennis tell us what was going on? I don't think I would have thought to warn them to be careful, but maybe it would have been easier to piece together what happened and why. Things we will never know. I have lots of fears, and it's usually a full-blown panic attack before I can force my thoughts in another direction. Something triggers a memory, which leads to another memory, and then the realization of what happened slams into me yet again. And I think about how Norma must have felt in those last moments. And it's like I can actually feel her fear, her disbelief, and her horror. The fear sometimes manifests itself in a terror that something will happen to other family members. My daughter recently talked about how tired she was and was going home. Later, I tried calling, couldn't reach her, and the panic rushed over me every time something like that happens. It was simple. She had just decided to stop off somewhere. But I panicked in the same way every time something like that happens. Charla recently panicked because she couldn't reach my mom on the phone. The hardest thing I've ever done in my life was tell my parents Norma and Dennis were dead. My heart broke as I watched them hear the news and have the realization of it soak in. I will never ever forget the look on my dad's face. He looked like a confused, lost child with tears flowing down his cheeks. And I would see that look often over the next few years. We would be watching TV and I would look across the room to see him or Mom crying quietly. My parents aged 10 years over just the first few months. What happened took all the joy out of their lives. Charla was almost destroyed. She moved in with me and her grandparents, and I lost track of the times that she would wake me in the middle of the night because she couldn't sleep. She was scared to walk out into the hallway, even though a light was left on. My room was next to hers, but I had to get up, open my door, and wait for her to come to my room. If she was out and came in after dark, she would call for one of us to stand at the door and wait for her to come inside. I spent hours talking to her and praying that I was using the right words to let her know that, yes, this was the most difficult thing she had ever faced, and no, life would never be the same again. Not ever, not for any of us. But life would return to a new normal, and we would be stronger for having survived. My heart wasn't just broken by Norma and Dennis's deaths, or even by how they died. It broke when I told my parents, and every time I saw them crying. It broke when I had to walk Charla through her pain. And it breaks every holiday. It broke when Charla told me she was expecting a baby, realizing that Norma and Dennis would never know the joys of being grandparents, and they would have been such great ones. It broke when she had her baby this past year without her mom being there. And it broke just this week when 4-year-old Olivia saw a picture of Norma and asked, "Mimi, when is Aunt Norma coming back from heaven?" It will break when Charla gets married without her mom to plan or her dad to walk her down the aisle. Life will never be the same, and none of us will ever be the same. I said it was a nightmare, and I was right, but it never ever ends. And the memories of what happened, the fear, the anxieties, and the heartbreak will stay with me for the rest of my life. May God forgive you for what you've done.
All right, ladies and gentlemen. With that, the coverage of the investigation, the trial, and conviction of Brandon Dale Woodruff comes to a close. Normally, this would be where I put in my patent-pending Scott Pogensy personal opinion. However, this episode is already running a little long, plus, in just 2 weeks, we'll have the wrap-up show where probably 60% of the episode will be just my opinions. I'll save it all until then. So here's just a little preview of next week when we cover the status of Brandon's case now and all of the appeals that he's been through. Until then, remember to stay aware, stay strong, and get involved. See you next week.
During the oral arguments with the Sixth Court of Appeals, one of the justices picked up on that because he was questioning, I believe it was Mr. Guerrero that was arguing for the Attorney General's office, and he was asking Mr. Guerrero, even though the state doesn't have to provide motive, isn't it true that your motive is that Brandon was financially irresponsible, confused about his sexual orientation, that sort of thing. And Mr. Guerrero agreed, and one of the justices commented that if that's a motive for murder, then we better put a fence with razor wire on it around every university in Texas, because that sounds like about half of the college students in Texas.